Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, good evening, depending on where you're dialing in from. My name is Maria Jha. I'm the Transition Finance Lead here at SLR, and I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar, Investing Sustainably in Energy Transition Minerals. The webinar is very much based on a study we conducted and which was commissioned by the Green Purposes Company, a shareholder in the Green Investment Group. And it's great to be able to share our findings with you all today. But before I begin and I hand over to my colleague Nyomza, I'd like to make a few housekeeping points to avoid feedback and background noise and allow everyone to hear. We have muted all attendees, but of course we welcome your contributions. So please do type any questions that you may have into the chat function, and we will monitor these as we go along. We do have a dedicated Q&A at the end of the webinar, and we'll pick up any questions at the end as well. This is it from me for now. Over to you, Nyomza.
Great. Hi, everyone. I guess we can go to the next slide. Yeah, so this is a little bit what we'll be covering today. A brief introduction about sort of who we are, a summary of the findings of the report. And we'll do a bit of a conversation about, what this all means to put it into context. Then a little bit about how SLR and RCS is sort of supporting the energy transition. And then we'll have a sort of end section for Q&A. So feel free to already, directly put your questions if you have any lingering during the presentation. All right, next slide. Do you want to do an intro, Maria? Also, I can do this is just a little bit about SLR and who we are. Of course, at the bottom, you have sort of an overview of the companies that fall under SLR, including RCS Global, which I'm part of. And we represent have offices in different regions, sort of expertise in different sustainability areas. This is a great way to, with this report, how sort of we've come together to make use of our different expertise. So this is just a little bit about who we are. Next slide, please. And this is sort of who's in the call today. So I'm, Nyomza Miftari. I'm a project manager with RCS Global. And I'm joined here with by my colleagues Maria and Ben, and we're very sort of pleased to have Paul, and hopefully Vale will also join during the session for sort of the conversation later on. But I'll let everyone introduce themselves a bit more thoroughly during their sections of the presentation. All right, next slide. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about the report and sort of what it's about. You can go ahead to the next slide. So the report, which is titled Investing Sustainably in Energy Transition Minerals, basically focuses on key aspects of sustainable investment in critical minerals that are necessary for the clean energy transition. And the research shows the need for the world to transition away from fossil fuels to clean energy technologies such as solar panels, wind turbines, and batteries. Of course, to make this happen, there will be a significant demand for critical minerals needed. So for those technologies, right? And what we're talking about here is sort of lithium, nickel, cobalt, copper, and manganese, just sort of to name a few. The report in particular focuses on the important role the investment community has as a key facilitator to the energy transition. So it first breaks down what sustainable investment in energy transition means, but also explores sort of the barriers as well as enablers and opportunities for sustainable investment into energy transition minerals, right? In terms of methodology, the report, sort of the research really mainly consists of industry reports, articles, and relevant webinars, as well as different stakeholder perspectives, which we've done through a series of stakeholder interviews and categorize them into two groups, so investors and investees. And on the right hand of the slide here, you have sort of an idea of where those stakeholders sit and which group they kind of represent. And we'd just like to take the opportunity to actually thank all those that participated once again, which has really made the report quite enriching by providing sort of those valuable perspectives. So thanks to everyone again for taking part. Next slide, please. Okay, so in order to provide the right context, in the report we do provide an overview of the different critical minerals in question. So where they're concentrated geographically, where they're mined and processed, so and as well as the specific ESG risks associated to each raw material. And the main point we sort of highlight here is that while these minerals are essential for the clean energy technologies, the extraction and production is often linked to a number of ESG challenges, which then need to be addressed to ensure this just energy transition. And this is also, of course, then taken into account during the sort of the recommendation section of the report. Next slide, please. So talking a little bit more about the context, it was really important to also shed light into some important developments taking place. And here you see sort of another overview of some of those developments outlined in the report, including important regulations, responsible mining standards, as well as other related initiatives taking place. And what we aim to outline sort of is what role do these different initiatives play? How do they interact with each other? And are they sort of barriers or rather opportunities, right? So I think we can definitely say that a lot is going on for the time being. This is definitely a non-exhaustive list, what we've sort of outlined, but nonetheless important elements to consider when we're talking about the clean energy transition. Next slide. So when we analyze the barriers, we categorize them into two main sort of categories, mainly internal barriers that arise within organizations to sustainable investment in mining, and external barriers, so driven by factors beyond a company's immediate control to sustainable investment in mining. And when we looked at, for example, internal barriers, there was a combination of challenges, right? From lack of ESG knowledge, specifically at the board level, a lack of a universal way to track and monitor ESG data, including many different ESG standards. Then we had the costs associated to sustainable practices and the uncertainty of their long-term benefits, as well as sort of larger mining companies being able to handle those costs, but not necessarily the more junior mining companies. And lastly, the fear of greenwashing. So there were concerns raised that companies are overstating their ESG efforts, but also due to fear of greenwashing, you also had companies that are choosing to report less or not at all. Then external barriers, some of the issues included new regulations globally coming in to push mining companies to follow ESG standards. However, there's also some fragmentation between different regulation and what this means in terms of implementation. Then historic distrust of the mining industry was a major barrier, something many of the stakeholders we interviewed shared, as well as traceability of critical minerals. So while investors want transparency of where the minerals are coming from, this is not necessarily easy to do, and it creates this sort of fear of hidden risks in either in relation to sort of environment or social issues. Next slide, please. So moving on to the enablers and opportunities, here we found out from our sort of research is that there's two main enablers and opportunities. So the market opportunities that come from innovation and change, and stakeholder opportunities that focus on collaboration and partnerships. So what are some of the market opportunities we outlined? So for example, due to many ESG standards and regulation, this has created, of course, lots of confusion for companies and investors on which rules to follow, right? And some of the stakeholders we interviewed are really pushing to have a more clear and unified reporting requirements, and as well as consolidated standards, right? And this is also evident with the new Consolidated Mining Standards Initiative, which is, processing and under development. The other opportunity is the acceptance of a green premium. So the market isn't necessarily rewarding sustainable practices, although the demand for these critical minerals is expected to grow. In terms of stakeholder opportunities, there's an opportunity for development finance institutions to provide funding in mining projects, which makes it easier for private investors to get involved in markets that are crucial for the energy transition. And then encouragement of government partnerships between producing countries and sort of consuming countries also is an opportunity to attract investment. And it's just a side note, I think what was really interesting when we were doing the interviews is that a lot of the development financial institutions were not necessarily thinking of mining as an area for investment because this had maybe a negative connotation. But of course, mining is also really important to the energy transition. And I think now they're starting to look a little bit more into, how this can be done responsibly. Next slide. I think this is the last slide in terms of giving a summary. Yeah, so lastly, this is just an overview of some of the report's recommendations, which again are categorized in two sections. So first, unlock capital for the energy transition, specifically for responsible mining. So for investors, they should focus on collaboration and standardization with other investors to simplify financial practices and make mining projects more attractive, as well as advocate for consistent policy and leverage international finance institutions. While the recommendations for governments here is to create more consistent regulation and make it easier for companies to invest in mining, while of course following ESG standards, and as well focus on partnerships and collaboration to support the responsible mining. And the second recommendation is really to facilitate finance with strong ESG integration, right? And this is tailored to investors, downstream consumers, and investees, as well as industry associations. So for investors, the focus is working together to use consistent ESG data throughout the mining process, as well as engage directly with the mining companies about their ESG performance and encourage that sort of improvement. For downstream consumers and investees, it's about building or having boards with members experienced in ESG. So be transparent and engage also with communities as well as industry associations. And the industry associations should really foster cross-sector collaboration in order to harmonize fragmented ESG standards, but they should also include diverse voices such as NGOs, civil society, and communities in developing those standards. So this was just a really brief overview of the report. I will hand over to Maria for a brief discussion about some of these findings.
Yes, thank you very much, Nyomza. Hopefully this will have given everyone a good overview of the findings and also the recommendations and a little bit of the discussion as well that we've had with several interviewees that I think we interviewed around 30 different stakeholders. So it's been a really insightful study to make. So I'm very happy to have Paul Eakins with me today of the Green Purposes Company. We also were meant to have Wale Shonibari with us of the African Development Bank. He's running slightly late, so I will go ahead with Paul in the meantime. Again, if you have any questions for Paul that arise during our discussion, please pop them into the chat function, and we'll pick that up during our Q&A session at the end. So, Paul, very welcome.
Thank you.
It would be great thanks. It would be great if you could introduce yourself while you do so, perhaps consider already the following question. Having read the report yourself as well and discussed with your colleagues, it would be really interesting, I think, for everyone to know what the impact the findings have for you and the organization and how you will use the output to move the agenda forward.
Fine. Well, thank you very much, Maria, and thanks, Nyomza, for that excellent summary of what the report says. So, I'm Paul Eakins, and I'm one of the 5 trustees of the Green Purposes Company. This is a company that was set up at the time when the UK Green Investment Bank was sold to the bank Macquarie. And the purpose of setting it up at that time was to ensure that the Green Investment Bank continued to invest according to the 5 green purposes. And that's why we're called the Green Purposes Company. And that's our only role, is to ensure that those investments go into 5 broadly environmental areas. Um, we interact frequently with Macquarie on this. They report to us on the investments that they're making under their green investment team. And another of our roles has been to encourage the financial community to make a wider range of green investments. So everyone's well aware and familiar with investment in renewable energy, and obviously we're very much in favour of that. And the majority of Macquarie's green investment team's investment are along those lines. But we've produced 3 of these reports now. One was on natural solutions, natural climate solutions, nature-based solutions. One was on the circular economy, and this is the 3rd on critical minerals, or minerals for the energy transition. So thank you very much to RCS and SLR for producing this. We think it's a very good report, and we'll look forward to promoting it through our networks. All 5 trustees obviously have their own networks because that's what they were appointed for. My own particularly, when I'm not doing Green Purposes Company, I'm a professor of resources and environmental policy at University College London, which is the building you can see behind me. I'm also a member of UNEP's International Resource Panel, which has itself done quite a bit of work on minerals for the energy transition. And in that capacity, I talk to quite a lot of other bodies about this subject, and will obviously be bringing this report to their attention. In the near future, I'm going to make a presentation to the UNEP Financial Initiative, which will have about 400 people that thinking about financing this and other areas of environmental significance, and the Net Zero Banking Alliance. So those are some of the ways in which we'll obviously try to get the message out. We'll probably organise our own roundtable with our own contacts in order to propagate the report more widely. And obviously it'll be on our website. It'll presumably be on the RCS or SLR websites, and so that we can make sure that it's as widely read as possible. I guess that's going to be the limit of what we can do. We hope obviously it will catch on, and that the investment community in particular will find it useful.
Thank you very much, Paul. Yes, a very busy schedule ahead of for you, and to talk about the findings of the report. I think if we dive into it a little bit more within the context of the Green Purposes Company's mission, as you described it, but maybe also the various other activities and initiatives that you're part in. I'd like to focus, on the identified barriers here, and sort of given your experience then, Paul, and activities, which do you think is the most critical barrier to investment? Nyomza shared with us sort of some
Sure.
external, internal barriers, and it'd be really interesting to get your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing to stress is that mining is risky. I now know much more about mining than I thought I ever would know from working on these reports. And it's a very long-term and risky endeavor, which requires quite a lot of money to be put up front, and then that money has to be recouped with a risk component over subsequent decades, because very often these are 30 or 40-year projects. And investors need to make money, so that the actual task of stimulating investors and encouraging them to make the very considerable investments that the IEA, International Energy Agency, has identified as necessary if we're to push the energy transition along, is no mean task. If we want those minerals to be produced responsibly, i.e. to high environmental, social and governance standards, and mining historically has had many problems across those domains, well, then there may need to be a green premium. In other words, the minerals produced like that may be more expensive than the others. It's not entirely clear how much more expensive, and there are a number of surveys out there that suggest that there may only be incremental costs. In fact, some suggest that there may be innovation benefits that will enable companies to become more productive, and that therefore there will be benefits as well to producing minerals in this more responsible way. But equally, there are things that they'll need to do, especially with reporting and making sure they've got something good to report, which may cost money. At the moment, these markets are largely undifferentiated commodity markets, and there's not a lot of scope for even charging a green premium, let alone expecting people to pay it. And the report, as you saw in the presentation, has got some discussion of that. And governments are going to have to help with that through public procurement and through other ways, and consumers. The big companies that are making the technologies that use these minerals also may be required actually to discriminate between the kinds of the kinds of minerals they use. And I'm pleased to say there are signs that there are companies, big automotive companies, technology companies, who want to be able to say that they've used minerals that have been responsibly mined. So there will need to be a policy push, but there is also consumer sentiment that will encourage companies to go down this route. And although the green premium may be substantial, by the time these companies have added all the other value to the products that they produce, the actual percentage increase in the final consumer price is likely to be very modest. So I'm hopeful that that kind of differentiated market will develop.
Great, thank you, Paul. Maybe staying with the green premium for one further question. And we've just had another COP or the end of COP and the discussions around carbon markets. Do you see that there is the need, you spoke about the need of more policy in order to actually facilitate or encourage markets to absorb a green premium? How do you see what has been discussed there as maybe a step into that direction as well?
Well, it's obviously a possibility, and it looks as if we are going to be left with carbon markets. I have to say I'm much less enthusiastic about carbon markets in principle, because the opportunities for them to be simply fraudulent seem to be almost infinite. And I hardly read the news every day to see that there's another scam has been perpetrated with on carbon markets where they have not delivered the emission reductions or avoidances which were promised to the people who invested in them, or there have been human rights abuses whereby large areas of land in developing countries have been effectively taken over for carbon production, for carbon sequestration, whereas they need to support people. So I think there are lots and lots of problems with carbon markets that are very, very far from being sorted out. But I think with minerals, there are probably better opportunities, in the sense that if you're going to certify something as ESG, you're going to have to do a lot of monitoring and reporting. And that's the big problem with carbon markets generally, that the monitoring, reporting and verification is really difficult, that you're actually getting these emission benefits. But if you're doing that monitoring, reporting and verification anyway, in order to get your ESG credentials, in order to be able to charge your green premium, well, it may well be that there will be carbon benefits which may attract investment from other sources which you might not otherwise get. I mean, the most obvious one is when mines shift from fossil fuel based extraction to renewable energy based extraction. Lots of them are doing that anyway. but obviously it will help where there are significant costs involved. It will help if they're able to generate some carbon credits as well, which will then perhaps serve to offset some of that green premium, which will otherwise need to be paid.
Yes, thank you, Paul. I think the way you described it is it's very clear, I think, to all of us working on this project, but I'm sure also the audience that there is a lot of innovation still needed and sort of refining of mechanisms, even if the principle, as you mentioned with carbon, voluntary carbon markets is the right one. There is still quite some work to be done in order to make it really effective. And maybe staying with on the theme of innovation and collaboration and looking into the future a little bit with my next and sort of also final question. I think we have seen that the energy transition requires a level of multi-sector and sort of multi-discipline collaboration that is somewhat unprecedented. I think we can all agree, at least in recent times, and I think the Green Purposes Company is a strong case in point here. And in view of this, which partners, you mentioned governments, there is obviously other stakeholders as well, but which partners do you regard as the most important facilitators in this? Who does the onus fall on in order to really move this agenda forward?
Well, I think as you kind of suggested, the onus falls on all of us. So on
Mm,
all the facilitators. The companies obviously need to step up. And in doing the work that I've done in this area, I've really been very encouraged to the extent to which many of the major mining companies are stepping up. They recognize their responsibilities to do mining in a different way. I'm particularly impressed with the work that the International Council on Mining and Metals is doing, their biodiversity and nature statement that came out earlier this year. I thought there was a very strong statement on the rights of indigenous peoples as well. And that seems to me to be showing a real willingness to try to get things right. Obviously, they won't always succeed and accidents will happen, but the first task is to try to make sure that the systems are in place that they don't. And I do see many companies really trying to do that. Then there are governments, and finally, governments in the West, at least, seem to have woken up to the importance of mining and minerals. I mean, the European Union, for example, or in Europe generally, we've been trying to get rid of mines and imagining that we don't need them, that these minerals can be produced by other countries. Well, we're recognizing that that's a pretty risky strategy. And of course, the country that has not taken that strategy and has been incredibly strategic with regard to these minerals is China.
mm,
And China has an absolutely dominant position, both in the provision of those minerals that it's rich in on its territory, so particularly rare earth minerals, etc., but in building up a processing and refining capacity that is absolutely colossal, even where it doesn't have those minerals on its own territory. So, for example, with regard to cobalt, although it has no cobalt, it processes about 70% of the world's cobalt. So I think all countries are recognizing as the technologies that require these minerals, particularly electric vehicles, particularly renewable energy technologies, become more important strategically, because energy is just about as strategic as you can get, that they need to build up their own capacities in this area. And that it doesn't do anyone any good for all countries to be totally dependent on a single source. So that's government role.
mhm.
And then I think NGOs and consumers have their own responsibilities. I mean, the NGOs push very hard, and I actually think that many mining companies recognize that the NGOs will not let them produce minerals in the way that they have produced them in the past. They're much better organized, and of course, we're in now um, a global conversation about this, so that local communities are much empowered by that. And then I've mentioned that there are many original equipment manufacturers who are also interested in playing their part to get the minerals that they need and want um, produced in the right way. So I think there is potentially a general push, and I don't want to be Pollyanna-ish about this, because obviously there's lots and lots of problems out there, and there are plenty of people who don't want to do the right thing. But I think if all those who do want to do the right thing push as hard as they can, we can make progress.
Agreed, Paul, and a positive outlook despite the challenges that we're all facing. So this we're coming to the end of our conversation here with Paul. Thank you very much for that. Paul will stay until the end of the webinar for the Q&A. So any questions that you have, yeah, pop them in the chat, please. You have time to let the conversation sink in a little bit, and I look forward to continuing it over the Q&A. On the note that Paul said, all of us are called upon to do their bit. The next part really is about us as a team at SLR, a global team, and how we what we do to, or how we are helping to facilitate the energy transition. And so my colleague Ben and I will give you a little bit of insight into our work here at SLR and how we are supporting investors to facilitate the energy transition. We've recognized, can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. Thanks. And the next one. Perfect. So what this slide kind of shows you is that we recognized as an organization that sustainability challenges, the challenges of our time really can't be addressed working in silos. And so the skills, I think we've heard that throughout this webinar, the skills that are needed to drive this agenda forward really are sort of interlinked. And so we work very much across disciplines, and we bring together suitable teams from a variety of technical and sort of scientific expertise, managerial expertise to solve a certain problem. And this actually also means that we combine desk-based research, as we have conducted just now with this piece of work, with boots on the ground and really sort of community based field assessments. And my colleague Ben Lepley will be speaking to that a little bit later on and illustrate that for you. But sustainable and transition finance are very much at the center of what we do. Next slide, please. So this is to illustrate a little bit that we really support along the entire investment life cycle. We can act on both sides of a transaction and support our clients throughout. And as Nyomza showed earlier, we have a whole array of 45 different scientific and technical disciplines that can really help also at portfolio level to make this transition happen ultimately, and support with interventions of all kinds. There would be in theory a lot to talk about here, but we thought it'd be really interesting to focus in on our transactional support and due diligence that we do. Yeah, can I have the next slide, please? And what we have come up with here in this context, and really the report's findings really echo also our practical experience working with all kinds of organizations that are actively investing along the battery value chain. And what we're finding is that the integration of ESG considerations, as Paul also has outlined, into investment decisions has made processes more complex very often, sometimes also more drawn out and possibly also fragmented. So having listened to the organizations that we're working with, we have thought about how best to address this problem, and have come up with this solution where we're basically bringing together our commercial, technical, and ESG teams to work together and really move a investment process forward, rather than having sort of a siloed approach and making it much harder for the parties of a transaction. And then we deliver this holistically in one comprehensive report. So I'll be talking a little bit about the commercial bit and then hand over to Ben for the technical and ESG part. So in the commercial piece, we'd be supporting with an analysis of the financials, the geographical, and the sort of market risks as well. This can actually feed into a little bit of the technical due diligence as well already as a sort of techno-commercial analysis whereby we can give a view of a specific technology, a chosen technology, the potential or a return on investment of a chosen technology in a particular market, for example. So we'll try to combine and work together as much as we can to then in the end produce a comprehensive report. But at this point, I'd like to hand over to my colleague Ben, who will be able to bring this a little bit more to life as well for you. Thank you.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you, Maria. So my name is Ben Lepley. I'm on the mining advisory team at SLR. So I used to be a geologist, but now I'm in the ESG side of things. So I've been a part of the due diligence process across from the exploration through to operation and closure side, which is what really we do at SLR, is focus on all angles of the value chain, from very preliminary early stage exploration projects all the way through to closure. So just on this slide here, we have just some general points about how we go through the due diligence process. And from the technical and ESG side, generally they're pretty interlinked, although they're in separate boxes here, as Maria's saying. And as my role, I'm in between both the technical and the ESG side. So really, at the beginning of the due diligence process, it's really about understanding material risks, and the potentially salient risks to human life as well. So it's interlinking all the technical things that could go wrong, or potential impacts at a mine or an exploration project, and how they interact with environmental, the receiving environment, as well as the community surrounding the project. Then also understanding how those link to costs and the technical challenges at a mine site, which, as Paul pointed out, it's a very complex and very long-winded process. Many things can go wrong along the way, so we're there trying to understand the technical risk. So once we've understood those, we then go on to really analysing and quantifying, or trying to quantify those risks in terms of material impacts on the company or on the project, and that's often resulting in a detailed cost analysis for our clients. And our clients can be both on the financial side, from investment groups, from banks, but also from the other side, from exploration and mining companies themselves. And then towards the end there, we tried to bring together all three of those disciplines we have there, the commercial side, technical, and the ESG, into a comprehensive report that really tries to outline the risks to investing in that specific project, from all the different angles. So next slide, please. Just a bit of a workflow, generalized workflow here of how we would do it. So we have a client who's selected specific projects, and it could be we're looking at a whole range of projects at the same time, to give, if a company is looking at investing in a portfolio, for example, or it might be a specific commodity, so they're looking at several projects of a specific commodity around the world. So we would then select that technical team based on that project specifically, and we have people all around the world that can help out. Our mining advisory team is spread generally across North America, Europe, and Australia, and we have technical expertise in all those areas spread around the globe. We'll then do this kind of phase one desktop assessment, where we're identifying the key risks or the fatal flaws, and really we're honing in on what is material to the development schedule, if it's not in operation, or if it's struggling with some of the scheduling to get the ore out to market, for example. What is material to the costs, both the capital costs and the operating costs, and then also thinking about reputational risk to the company as well, or any investment into that company. And then generally this is follow. Sometimes that's it. Then that's our part done. If there are there are fatal flaws that can't be seen past, then that can be the end of our road. But quite often we then go on to more of a deep dive phase two, where we then go and visit the site and get some boots on the ground, generally sending geologists, mining engineers, geotechnicians, environment and social people to site to really have a sniff around and really understand that context in a bit more detail, have some discussions with the key staff on site, and then that's all then pull back together again in a more detailed financial model to understand, and really try to calculate the potential financial risks associated with the project, and then that's pulled together in a kind of DD report that summarizes all those risks and the costs. So next slide, please, Jane. And if you could just click 3 times just to pop up our little windows. There we go. Thank you. So yeah, just breaking it down to different phases of the mine. These are the kind of things we focus on. At the exploration side, on the left-hand side, our geologists and also ESG experts are the ones focusing in this area generally, thinking about the geological knowledge and the risks associated with that, the quality and quantity of the exploration being undertaken, if it's following best practice. Permitting and approvals is a common issue throughout the whole life cycle and is a major barrier to many operations. So that we spend a lot of time understanding that, what environmental safeguards are in place, and then the community engagement and the social license to operate side of things. And once you get into the mining stage, that's when we start to be a bit more complex. We get a lot more people involved. That's where we start to really dive into the nuts and bolts of how a mine operates, both in terms of the design of the project, so thinking about the resources and the reserves that then feed into the actual operation itself, and how you're designing the mine, how you're scheduling that, the ore being taken out, the mine itself, then how it goes through the processing plant and the flow sheet, the metallurgy involved, the specific ore deposit, which obviously is variable. Every single project is variable across the world, but pulling from experience from similar projects is our plan. Then some other very important things we tend to focus on: the infrastructure and logistics of getting ore to the mill, and then from the mill or processing plant to the customer. Water use and discharge is becoming ever growing, a bigger problem across the world as we see climate change impacts, particularly in water stressed areas. That can be one of the major challenges, is balancing the water usage and discharge at a specific site. Permitting and approvals again is a big part of that. And then really focusing in on the ESG side of things, and environment and social impact assessment, so ESIA, management and monitoring on site. What are the guys on site actually doing? Is it good enough for best practice internationally? And this is all set against the context of if there are specific requirements, for example, the World Bank Equator Principles, International Finance Corporation performance standards. If a client is requesting that, we can then think about it in those contexts as well, to make sure it's really being done to international best practice. And then some other key aspects then on there: stakeholder engagement and side of things, grievances with the local communities, the socio-economic development, and then health and safety management. And it all gets pulled together into the financial modeling or economic assessment to really calculate those risks. And then from the closure side, then we can work on projects that are in the closure phase, and again, it's a similar kind of things, thinking about the permits and approvals, thinking about how the ongoing monitoring and management of the environmental risks as well as social risks, and hopefully then collaborating with the local communities to make that the closed mine really fit for purpose for those guys. So I thought I'd just pull together some of those key challenges that we look at generally from the mining and exploration and closure side. I hope that's been useful. So I think, Maria, if I'm not wrong, we are going to go to questions from here. There we go. And apologies for talking quickly. I tend to do that, but hopefully it made a good sense.
Yeah, we do have some questions. Should I just start, Maria? Maybe listing out a few for the team. So the first question we have in is, from an investment point of view, wouldn't insisting on responsible mining make a risky investment even riskier?
I think that
So
might be one for Paul,
one for me?
possibly. Yeah, we can
I mean,
take that too.
I mean, obviously, the answer to that question seems to me to be yes. And yes, in the sense that you're going to have all sorts of monitoring, reporting systems in place in order to make sure that you do actually deliver on the ESG. Set against that, of course, you've got issues of social license to operate, which are really important. And there are a number of high profile examples around the world of where the failure to obtain and maintain a social license to operate has brought a mining project to a close, whereby they can't actually produce. Having made all the investments up front, the social controversy has been such that effectively they can't proceed. That's probably the most expensive and risky outcome of all, because obviously you're not earning anything under those circumstances. And then obviously on a similar consideration, you've got NGOs looking at what's happening. You've got reputation risks. These are global issues now. They're not limited to any particular company. So sure, there's going to be more upfront investment in order to get the systems right, but a determination to do that will mean that the host governments are more likely to feel that you're welcome and are therefore more likely to facilitate your work. Your local communities are not going to get excited. In other work I've done recently, there's several thousand local conflicts that are bearing heavily on mines and mining operations because these ESG issues were not properly handled through the course of the mining operation. So yeah, it might introduce more risk, but it might actually lead to less risk of the whole operation coming unstuck. And I think obviously circumstances are different for each company. Circumstances are different in different countries. That's one of the things that the mining companies are going to have to wrestle with.
Maybe, thank you, Paul. Maybe to add from sort of our perspective as well and our observation, we're in touch with so many different organizations. I mean, specifically this team as well as Ben said, with quite a range of investors, but also, of course, we talk across the organization with other teams that are maybe supporting corporates. And I think in terms of the question of making whether ESG considerations making an investment even riskier, I think this is a great opportunity from what we understand from our conversations for governments here to step up a little bit more, possibly still, to really help de-risk some of these projects at their initial phase to the benefit of then putting robust ESG systems in place. So that was just an add-on to Paul's observation here, that this could be solved via some governmental initiatives, or more governmental initiatives than we're currently seeing, specifically focused on mining.
Yeah, I think
Maria, can I
that's a
just
great
add
point, and I think that particularly through export credit agencies, most countries that host large mining companies have export credit agencies, and de-risking responsible mining in that kind of way, I think makes an enormous amount of sense. So I'm sorry, Ben, I cut across you.
No, sir, no problem. No, I was just going to add as well, things like the Critical Raw Materials Act from the EU, that's what it's all about, is de-risking investment in these kind of projects. So it's not just mining projects, but it's recycling and extraction of secondary raw materials, etc. But really, the whole point is you go through this quite difficult application process, which I've helped a few clients with, and it's very invasive, and there's a lot of questions on there that really the whole point is for the independent assessors to really focus in on what are the key risks. By the time it gets through, and if it's given the strategic project status, which is the EU's kind of seal of approval, that is then de-risk that project to a certain level at which the EU is quite comfortable that the risks are manageable, essentially, and it's giving the go ahead then for other investors to get involved. And I think it's through tools like that, these legislative tools, that will really help promote responsible mining rather than just kind of the way we've done it in the past. So I think that can be really helpful, having those policies and legislation in place. Yeah.
I am conscious of the time, so we'll try to take as many questions as possible. But of course, I mean, feel free to anyone who's participating today to reach out to us if they have any other questions. One we have for Paul: will the Green Purposes company plan to become a shareholder elsewhere too, or is the Green Investment Group the sole focus?
Very much the latter. We were set up particularly to look at the Green Investment Bank. The Green Investment Bank has really been absorbed by Macquarie and is now is part of a much larger green investment activity going on in Macquarie. And Macquarie, to give it credit, has said it's going to apply to that much larger group of investments the green purposes. So in a way, our role within Macquarie has become much larger than was initially envisaged, because we were supposed to be just looking after the Green Investment Bank, which was a very niche activity when Macquarie took it over, and it's now much larger and has a much wider group of investments of much more value than the Green Investment Bank had when it took it over. But I don't think we're going to stray beyond that, although I have to say that I think it is a very interesting model for companies that want to develop a reputation in this field, actually to have something which is a little more than the kind of green advisory groups, which obviously many investors already have, because we actually have a golden share that allows us to insist that investments through the Green Investment Bank are made according to the green purposes. So that's a kind of stronger dimension to governance than the simple green advisory group. But as far as I'm aware, it's not something that's widespread elsewhere.
Great. I have another one for maybe Ben. Does SLR's mining team have a regional focus?
No, we're very much spread around the globe. I think there's no particular region. We focus on people in the Europe team. The mining advisory Europe team tend to work mainly on projects around here, but then we spread out across the globe. And we have North American focus and Australian focus, but people from those regions have then experience across Africa, South America, etc. And any commodity really. Obviously, coal is one that is being phased out, and we're not too involved in coal projects anymore. But apart from that, we do tend to try and focus on the critical minerals. But other commodities are very welcome as well, I guess.
I'll ask another one. I would presume it's a UK-centered question for you, Paul. In terms of policy, will the UK diverge from the EU in any area? And what do you think is the UK's ambition?
Well, that's very obviously. I don't have a crystal ball, and I might as well lay my cards on the table. I think it would be very, very unwise for the UK to diverge from the EU in this particular area, or indeed in many complex areas. The whole minerals cycle, from mining through to the recycling and end of life, the investments required are very large, and it's much easier to make those investments if you're serving a large market. And the UK now is not part of the EU single market, and I think it'll be most unlikely to get large investments that need to be serving a large market if it's diverged considerably from our nearest large market, which of course is the European Union's. So I think it would be very unwise for it to do that. I think we have a government that is talking about getting closer to the European Union rather than moving away from it. So I would guess and hope that over the next few years we will see more cooperation on these kinds of very very large strategic issues that require large investments and large markets in order to make commercial sense. But you never know. Politics is an unpredictable business, and I don't have a crystal ball. Otherwise, I would be a very rich man.
Maybe I can add to this one as well, conscious of time, but just one point. If we take the maybe financial services sector reporting requirements as a bit of guidance as to what might be coming also in this other area, is that there is maybe a little bit of it's a different approach, let's say, that the UK takes with.
Maria, we've lost you, or is it just my end?
No, I lost it too.
That was strange.
Can you hear me
Yes, now we
now?
can.
Okay, so, sorry, trepidations of a webinar. I was going to say that if we can take the financial sector reporting requirements, of course, which is also part of an investment cycle in some ways, as a bit of guidance as to what maybe the UK might be doing, then it is taking the best from the EU and maybe innovate a little bit further and not diverge enormously. And so there is some interoperability there, and I would imagine that is also should be the case with any sort of incentives that are coming from the government side. So that's sort of our observation where we are with the investment space to date. Oh, and we have Wale joining us. Hi, Wale. We're just coming to the end of the webinar. Great to see you.
Um,
Shall we? I'm just thinking we have 3 minutes. It would be great to ask Wale one last question and maybe let him end the webinar as such, Wale. If you're ready, then I fire a question at you immediately now that you've
yes.
joined us. But I know you've been to COP, and so I wanted to ask you a question that I think would be interesting for the audience as well, with that experience behind you, and from the perspective of a region that is most affected by climate change, but yet requires a lot of co-investment to facilitate the energy transition. Is there a specific area in the current financial system that would benefit from more collaboration and perhaps also innovation? I'm just alerting you to the fact that we have about 2 minutes left. So I'll leave you the closing words on this one, if that's okay, Wale.
Yes, I'm really sorry. I got the times
No
mixed up.
problem.
However, just to answer your question very briefly, I think that there's a recognition that the MDBs have a significant role to play in mobilizing financing. So, very important that we come up with more innovative instruments to provide credit enhancement for investments in the areas such as blended finance and guarantees, and also more patient capital because you really need the patient capital to support the the junior mining companies through the development cycle because that's where we see many of them struggling and so these are areas in which the MDBs really have to focus on the patient capital, capital markets reforms, and also guarantees and blended finance to support more investment. Apologies once again.
No problem, Wale. Thank you very much for that insight. Paul and us, we have discussed to do maybe another webinar, and we certainly will invite you to that one. And then the audience can dial in again to hear a little bit more about your perspective from the African continent, because I think it's a really relevant perspective to provide. I think it takes us to the end of the webinar now. So if I can say, first of all, thank you, Paul, thank you, Wale, thank you, Ben and Nyomza, and everyone joining us today. We have recorded this webinar as well, so we'll be circulating it, and wishing everyone a wonderful rest of the day as well. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.